Hello and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson, and a very warm welcome to this really special episode where we're celebrating the first birthday of this podcast. We launched a year ago on the 28th of September 2022, and there have been thousands of downloads since then. And it's been a really exciting time to see the podcast grow. So in this episode celebrating the birthday, I thought I would share my own learnings, what I've learned about communication from launching and developing my podcast. I'm doing this because I know that some of you are quite curious and interested in learning how to launch your own podcasts. I also know that there are many learnings that I can apply and I use for myself, but also with my clients. So I thought I would share this here. The launch of my podcast, I've been thinking about for a really long time before it actually got to that moment of going live in September last year. In fact, there were lots of thinking time, there's lots of reflecting time, but it was all part of my vision, which is about helping 100,000 people to speak up and share their voice and to speak confidently and communicate confidently in the way that they're working with others around the world. I'm also really passionate about working with people all over the world. And my mission is to work with people in over 100 countries, supporting them as leaders, as managers, as teams, to communicate and connect through the power of cultural intelligence. So let's come to these learnings. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to be sharing at the end of today's episode a really exciting competition to celebrate the birthday. So make sure you wait until the end of the episode to hear more about that. But let's come back to these learnings because I hope that you're going to get really rich, valuable insight from some of the things that I went through on my own journey. So the first learning that I want to share with you was that it was really important to me to have a clear vision of success. And what I mean by this is that I've just shared with you my vision for this podcast and what it is I want to achieve with it. And when I was planning it, it was really important for me to understand, what did success look like? Who was I talking to? What was it that I wanted to share, and how did I want to engage with people listening to the podcast and watching the YouTube versions of these? In a similar way, I often start with this question with my clients. I ask them, what is your vision of success? What does success look like to you? If we have this in our minds, whether it's about developing our career or developing our communication or launching a podcast, this can really help us to measure, to one, have a clear objective, but two, to measure our progress, to understand how we're fulfilling that objective. So that's a great place to start. The second part of this was actually moving into identifying my gaps. So for me in the podcast, I realized pretty quickly that there was a lot to learn. There are many different aspects of podcasting that I wasn't familiar with, such as some of the technical aspects, some of the equipment I needed to know about, and even how to get the best results through the way that I was recording sound and visual. It was because of these identifying of gaps that I was then able to work out, okay, so what did I need to go and learn? And I went and read some books and I listened to some other podcasts, but eventually that also led me to the point of realizing I needed more support in my business with launching this podcast. And that's when I got Sarah, who is my assistant, to help me. And she does a fabulous job with some of the technical side of making this podcast episode a reality. I do the recording and then she does all the wonderful technical wizardry to make it come to life. But in the same way, when I'm working with my clients, I ask them, do you know what your gaps are? Do you know where you're strong and where you're doing well at the moment with your communication? And do you know where you need to work on? Sometimes my people actually have really good pictures of where they're at and they've had good feedback already. Others are quite self-critical and tend to take a very negative view of their own skill set and actually really benefit from my objective feedback to understand actually they are doing quite well in a number of areas already. We all have gaps in our knowledge or in our skill set, so it's really important to understand realistically what are those gaps and how do you want to lean into support to help you with those gaps. So from there, my next major learning was about letting go of perfectionism. Now, I'll be honest with you, this is a really big one for me. I am somebody who really wants to do a great job, wants to deliver a great product each time, a great service each time. But perfectionism, I realised, was going to really hold me back, particularly with launching and creating these podcast episodes. So for me, it was realising that to get to launch, I wouldn't necessarily be 100% confident with everything that was in place. In fact, there was a lot to learn even in those very early days, those early episodes. Things didn't always go according to plan. And in some ways, I'm always and still on that journey with learning. I think that's a great learning for life, and I often use that idea of letting go of perfectionism with my own clients as well. Often the people I work with are really concerned about how they sound, but they're getting quite hung up on really specific aspects, perhaps their voice, their pronunciation. Perhaps they think it's about something unrelated, such as their grammar, rather than realizing what's important is the way that they're communicating and connecting through their communication. So this idea of letting go of perfectionism was something I've embraced and I continue to embrace with my podcast. And it's certainly a principle that I work with my people as well. Now, a connected idea is the philosophy of communication agility. And this is something that I've spoken about in previous episodes and is really important to me because it is much better to have flexibility in the way that you express yourself. And if you make a mistake, to pause, smile, and start again and try and re-express yourself. How this shows up in this podcast is that you'll notice that I tend to take quite a conversational style with this podcast. It's not 100% word perfect. I'll be honest with you, there are times when I potentially might miss a word, or perhaps I skip a word or stumble. And yet I really think it's important as a demonstration to you, for people who are listening and watching this, that I keep going. I find a way to re-express myself. And that's because I'm not some sort of Hollywood actor. I'm a real person, and this happens to real people too. So this philosophy of communication agility, I live very much in this podcast. I sketch out, map out what I'm going to say roughly. I have my key points. I have a little review, and then I do one take. I try not to keep stopping and starting and re-recording, because I just don't think that's the best way to share my ideas, and also to make sure that you're gaining from my ideas. That would slow me down. Equally, when I'm working with my clients, communication agility allows people to relax, to be more themselves and express their personality. It helps them to feel more confident rather than getting hung up on specific words and phrases. So I think this philosophy goes through many different parts of life and is a really important learning for everybody. So from communication agility, I'm going to talk about a few areas more briefly. I love to be really focused on being concise for myself and for others. So you'll notice these episodes are very rarely more than about 10 or 15 minutes. I think this is important because your time is valuable, and you may be listening to this when you're walking or driving or commuting to work. Maybe you have a limited amount of time between two different meetings where you're perhaps relaxing and listening to this episode. So I want to keep it fairly focused on specific topics and time constrained. It's the advice I give my clients as well. Get focused on being concise. Make sure you know what your key messages are and really think about those messages in the context of who you're talking to and why it matters to them. As well as being concise, I think about my energy. So before I record every single episode, I'm thinking about getting into the flow of recording this, making sure that you feel my energy, whether that is watching the video or even when you're listening to this podcast. Hopefully you can hear the energy in my voice. I think energy is important, and that's why I stand for recording these episodes. And it's something that I often work with my clients as well. How are they projecting their energy, whether they are standing for presentations, sitting in meetings? How are they making sure that their energy is felt in the room? Being practical, that is a key learning and something that's important to me. I wanted to make sure that every episode is on a very specific topic so that you have some particular learnings and insights that you can take away. And then I always ask questions at the end of each episode so that you have something to think about and really work out, how do I apply this to me? How do I activate this and bring this into my own world? And so being practical is important. When I was developing the podcast, I equally was thinking about, how do I make this as practical as possible? Clearly, I don't have all day, every day to record these episodes. I'm meeting lots of clients, doing many meetings, preparing for various events and webinars and talks. That's why I often record a few of these episodes together, maybe 2 or 3 back to back, so that I can batch create the content, and that makes it a lot easier as well for when Sarah, my assistant, is doing the admin and the tech parts of it. So being practical is important to me. And it's important when I also think about my clients, being practical in your communication, not aiming to speak in a particular sophisticated way or some other way that doesn't sound like you. Be practical, talk like you, talk in the way that is going to be simple, but will also connect with other people. And then the final point is about feedback. Feedback continues to be incredibly important to me, and I know I'm doing a good job in fulfilling my objectives when I get feedback on the podcast, on the episodes. And I do this through, clearly the reviews that I receive, which I'm always really pleased to have. But also whenever I create an episode, I put it out there. Maybe you discovered this episode today through the way that I shared it on one of my social media channels or through the emails that I create. The idea here is that I want to get your thoughts, and people often comment, particularly when I share it on social media, about what they find particularly resonant, what really connects with them, and what is interesting. Feedback matters to me, so that is something that should matter to you as well. In your communication, the way that you will improve is by having ongoing feedback, knowing what you're doing well and how you can improve further. Now, I promise that at the end of each episode, I ask you questions to reflect on this, and that's what I will do right now. So as we come to the end of this episode, and I've been sharing everything that I've learned about communication through launching a podcast, I'd like to ask you, which of these learnings particularly apply to you and your communication? Is there something here that you can work on and think about in your own communication development? I would love to know, so please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. And because I do love feedback, I'd also love to invite you at this stage to share with me, what new topics, what new areas would you love me to talk about in the future? What haven't I talked about? Maybe there's some things that you're experiencing right now, some challenges, and you'd like to share your situation and get some thoughts about that. I would love to know about that, because I think that'd be great to have some real life examples we can use for focusing on and talking about in these podcast episodes. So again, feel free to reach out to me via the links and let me know your suggestions. Now, I promised you right at the beginning of today that we're going to have a few things to celebrate in the podcast birthday, including a competition. So now it's competition time. So I'm running a competition, which is for this week until the 1st of October. And that competition is to win a free coaching session with myself worth £200. And for you to enter that competition, what I would love for you to do is to make sure that you subscribe, whether that is your podcast platform or on YouTube. And if you have enjoyed today's episode, I would invite you to leave me a review and share this episode with somebody else. Once you've done that, just send me a note, contact me via the links and let me know, and just say, enter podcast competition, and I'll enter you into the prize draw. So good luck with that. The other thing that I'm launching today as part of the celebrations for my podcast birthday is that I know that some of you have contacted me and asked me about launching a podcast. Maybe you have plans for yourself, if you're running a business, or maybe you're thinking about running a podcast to share your own passions and interests. If that's the case, then I have something for you, because I do know how overwhelming it can be when you're thinking about and planning the idea of a podcast. I call this my podcast kickstart session. And what this is just a planning session for an hour where we'll sit down, we'll plan out what you've got already, what you have in mind, and I'll share with you some of these insights and insider tips to really make sure that you are working forward towards making sure that your podcast becomes a reality. It's an opportunity for you to ask any question of me. And for this very special time around my podcast birthday, I'm offering that session for £99 only. So if you would like to take advantage of that offer, which is running until mid-October, please get in contact with me via the links below and just ask about my podcast kickstart session. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this incredibly special birthday episode. The podcast has been running a year and I'm so happy to celebrate it with you. I want to just say a huge thank you to everybody who has listened to these episodes, downloaded the episodes, shared the episode, subscribed, rated and reviewed. It means a lot to me, and it really does make me so excited because it's helping me to fulfill the vision of reaching as many people as possible, those 100,000 people, helping them to speak up with confidence in 100 countries. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the coming year for Cultural Communication Confidence. And in the meantime, I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.